Yeah, so welcome everyone. My name's Jordan Moy. I'm the Sustainability Education Officer at North Sydney Council. And this webinar today is part of our Green Event Program, where we run about 30 or so webinars and events throughout the year, focusing on urban sustainability. This is the third webinar in October focused on food production. I'll send through, if you didn't, I do recognize some familiar names from the other two webinars, but if you haven't caught them, I'll send through the links to the other webinars. You might find those interesting as well. Also, before we begin, just like to acknowledge the Camaragal people, the traditional custodians of the land, and pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. And yeah, just wanted to welcome you and excited because we get to talk about tomatoes for an hour and a half tonight, which is pretty cool. And yeah, this is something lots of people have registered here. So I know a lot of people grow tomatoes every year. So I thought it'd be a good chance to take a deep dive into hybrid tomatoes and heirloom tomatoes, and then talking about some of the tips to grow tomatoes. We've also, so we'll be speaking with Gregg first about, from Useful Seeds, about heirloom and hybrid tomatoes. Then we'll chat with Meyles, talking about growing tips, and we've left plenty of time to answer any of your questions. So we'll get to that at the end, but if you do have any questions or comments, feel free to use the chat, send them through, and we'll do our best to sort of answer them as we go, or catch up and answer them at the end. So without further ado, just like to introduce Gregg Muller from Useful Seeds. Gregg's been involved in involved in growing heirloom varieties of veggies for nearly 20 years now, since the early 2000s. So he now runs a seed company called Useful Seeds. I'll include the link in the follow-up as well. So yeah, welcome Gregg. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Jordan. Lovely to be here.
Yeah, great. How was your, did you get to go in the garden today? How was your day?
I spent most of the day doing this presentation, I must admit. And then I was going to go out this afternoon, and a huge thunderstorm came through with hail and thunder, and so I've been running around cleaning up after that. So
I see.
Yeah.
How's that? Would that have affected the tomatoes at all?
They're all under shelter, so yeah, it was okay.
Okay, that's good. So
and the other thing too, an event like that, it's a good survival strategy, a good test for survivability. So
I see. So should we start from the start? How did you get involved in veggie growing firstly?
I started when I was a kid. We grew a great big lettuce on a compost bin, and then my mum was always a keen gardener. In my teenage years, I got into growing herbs and selling them at university markets and stuff. And we always grew tomatoes. Melbourne has a traditional gardeners competition where you're always trying to get a ripe tomato before Christmas. That's the holy grail of tomato growing in Melbourne.
Yeah.
And, you know, we just grew all the traditional varieties like Groslis and KY1 and some of those pretty standard Australian varieties. And yeah, just kept doing it when I moved out of home. And
So pretty casual at this point, just sort of growing with seasonal sort of produce type thing.
Yeah. And mostly tomatoes, a few chilies and stuff when I grew up and got into hot food. But yeah, that was mostly it. And then in the 2000s, I got online and joined a couple of Australian gardening forums and a couple of international gardening forums as well. And I think I got sucked in by some of the tomato growers who were corresponding with the folks from America.
Right.
And back then we could still legally bring tomato seeds in from the US. And there was a pretty rapid trade, I think, because, you know, every year in America, and there's like hundreds of thousands of really keen tomato growers in the States, and they have a really fantastic seed sharing organization called the Seed Savers Exchange. And, you know, every year there would be a new must-have tomato that would come out, and everyone on the American forums would be talking about it, and everyone in Australia would be, well, the people I knew would be getting hold of seed and growing it out and sharing it around and stuff like that. So,
right.
Also with the collapse of the Berlin Wall and the opening up of the Eastern Bloc, a lot of the really fantastic material from the Soviet Union and the Eastern European countries became available. And so a lot of those varieties have moved into North America and were grown out. And we got hold of a few of them here.
Right. So in the early 2000s, so was there many heirloom sort of hybrid varieties floating around, or not really, just all the stock standard sort of?
Oh, look, in the States, there's, I mean, probably, you know, a couple of thousand or 3,000 varieties of tomatoes. In Australia, I think they were here. You know, you always hear the stories of post-war migrants coming to Australia and smuggling in tomato seed, you know, their grandfather's tomato seeds in their boots. And growing them out in their front yards and stuff. And we've got access to some of that material as well. But I don't think to the extent that we've got from North America. But by the same token, there was also some fantastic old varieties actually developed in Australia. So there's the whole Burnley series that were developed by the Burnley Horticultural College in Melbourne, and the College series that were all developed by the Hawkesbury Agricultural College in outside Sydney. And so some of those are probably now heirloom tomatoes because they're relatively rare, but they were originally bred for, you know, Australian commercial growers.
Yeah.
And so, pretty good tomatoes too.
Yeah, I bet. So when did sort of things ramp up for you, and how do you really get into that heirloom and hybrid world?
Well, I got sucked into getting some of these American varieties or European varieties, and then heard about a thing called the Cross Hemisphere Dwarf Project.
Okay.
And a lovely lady who I haven't met, but I've corresponded with, called Petrina Nuski-Small. And she lives down on the south coast of New South now. She was in the States, ran into a renowned tomato breeder from the States. And she said, I want to get into this tomato crossing business, you know, like, what should I do? And he said, well, look, there's dwarf tomatoes that grow on really short little plants that you can grow in pots, but most of them are rubbish. So why don't you try crossing some of these lovely heirloom varieties that have got great characteristics to the dwarf tomatoes and develop some really nice dwarf tomatoes? And they got together, discussed it, and decided that it takes about 7 years to stabilize a variety. So you grow it out 1 year, you pick the characteristics you want, keep the seed, replant it next year, pick again, replant it, pick again. So about 7 years to get that stable.
Right.
But if you can grow in the southern hemisphere summer and send the seed to the northern hemisphere summer and get 2 generations in a year, you cut it down to 3.5 years to get a stable. I got sucked in. I started growing out a variety called Snowy. All of the dwarfs are named after the original dwarf tomatoes were named after Snow White and the 7 dwarfs.
Right.
So there was Snowy and Sleepy and Sneezy. And anyway, I was growing out Snowy, and one of those varieties has been carried on.
Great.
Bendigo Moon, I think it was.
Do you have that listed on your website as well?
I don't actually, but Petrina's got them on the dwarftomatoproject.net.
Okay.
And she still sells the seeds of those.
Yeah.
There was a change then to biosecurity laws, and we couldn't swap seeds back and forth anymore, which is a good thing. And the varieties that we ended up with here are not the whole range of all the dwarfs, but there's still, I think she's got about 40 or 50 listed, and in all sorts of flavors and sizes and colors and everything, growing on little dwarf plants. So the plants grow about this high. The tomatoes aren't dwarf, the plants are. So if you want to grow in pots or on a balcony, or you've got limited space, you can still grow spectacularly good tomatoes.
Right. Oh, that's good. 80% of residents in North Sydney live in apartments. So I think, that's such a good solution, and everyone wants to grow tomatoes. So that's great. I'll pass on that link that you mentioned in the follow-up. Right. Okay. So then what happened next?
Oh, sorry. I did put it on mute.
Oh, that's all
right. Well, I was into plant breeding, and I stupidly bought this book, which is Breed Your Own Vegetable Varieties. And she talked about breeding coloured snow peas. And she had started doing it, but she didn't do it. I got sucked in, and I thought, well, yeah, I can get those peas here. Why don't I try and breed a really nice purple snow pea or a really nice yellow snow pea? And I did.
That's the yellow one.
Wow. There's one of the yellow ones I bred. Yeah. And yes, and I'm working on reds at the moment. So reds and purples.
Yeah, right.
And then I just got sucked in, and it was on.
Yeah.
Why isn't there a tiny little rock melon or cantaloupe that you can fit in a lunchbox?
That's what you're working on as well?
Nobody's bothered. The only reason there is nobody's bothered to do it.
Yeah.
So I'll show you some pics in a minute.
Yeah, I think you've got some pics. Do you want to show us?
Yeah, I have. Let's see how we do the share screen business. That's the one. And if I click there, am I on the slideshow?
No, you're not.
Oh. Can people see that picture?
We can see the picture. It's just not on the full slideshow, but that's
okay. All right, let me stop the share.
Yeah.
I'll go to that. I'll go to that. Oh. I'm getting it there. How about that?
Yeah. Look, that's fine. We can see it fine. So yeah, great.
Okay, so previous photo. There's the various coloured snow peas I've bred or I'm in the middle of breeding. A purple one called Delta Dust that I used a parent. One of the parents is from a famous New South Wales breeder of peas called David Murray. The yellow one in the middle is called Joni's Taxi because it's a big yellow one. There's a red, half red snow pea is number 3, and the full red snow pea is number 4. And that's Joni's. And I'm working on these half reds. I'm still trying to get these stable. And that's the melon I'm working on.
What size is that at the moment? Is it? Oh, wow.
Yeah. Now, these are just spectacularly flavored.
Yeah, really? Yeah.
Oh, you walk out the back door and you go, oh, there's a ripe melon somewhere. You can just smell them. And they're super sweet. They'll fit in your pocket. So that one's getting close to stability. I'm almost ready to release that one.
Yeah.
And then I started working on baby purple carrots. I thought, well, there's little baby carrots that people with rubbish soil can grow, and they grow really quickly. Why aren't there multicolored ones? Why are there just orange ones? And I crossed them up, and the whole rainbow came out. Stupidly, I put too many varieties in there, and now I'm struggling to get them stable. So it's been taking a few years to get them right.
Yeah.
But I'm getting close. So these are from, oh, no, we're showing the PowerPoint, aren't we? So
we can see you on the screen as well.
Oh, so okay. So these are the little baby purple carrots that I've just picked that will be being replanted to get seed off for next year.
Yep.
Yeah.
Couple of questions. Kalita asks, how are you making them so small? How do you breed that?
There's a couple of varieties of little orange carrots around called Paris Market carrot, and it's a pretty standard little ball carrot that's in the marketplace, and they grow really quickly, and you don't need deep soil to grow them. And so for a home gardener or somebody who has limited space or rubbish soil, you can just grow them really quickly. And then I thought, why are parsnips always really, really long, and you've just got to have the best soil in the universe to be able to grow them? And the reason is nobody's bothered. Nobody's bothered to grow a little short, fat parsnip that anyone can grow. Apart from one variety available in Eastern Europe. And I got hold of some of that seed about 10 years ago, mixed it up with every Australian parsnip I could find, and now I harvest about 100 long ones and one short one. So I'm picking out the short ones, and I'm going to try and cross them up again this year.
Yeah, right. Is that sort of in a very basic sense how you sort of do that and have those hybrid varieties by just picking the characteristics that you want and then breeding that in for the next ones? Is that right? Yeah. Yeah,
pretty much. Tomatoes are a bit different to tomatoes and things with big fruits. You've got to look at the structure of the flower, but anything with a nice big flower, you can usually just hand pollinate it with like a little brush, like just a little paintbrush. And so, you go in and you make sure the pollen doesn't fall off, you pull apart the flower, you get the pollen from the other flower, transfer it over the next day, and grow a new pumpkin or a new tomato or a new pepper. But parsnips, carrots have tiny, tiny little flowers, and you can't isolate them. You can't stop them pollinating themselves. So what you have to, the only real strategy is just plant a whole lot, let the insects do their business, and then just plant hundreds and hundreds for the next few years, trying to pick out the ones that you want. Yeah, but you get there. Yep. You get there. And the harder you select, the quicker you get to your end result.
Yep.
So if I, had an acre and I could put in an acre of parsnips, I could pick out, the 50 or 60 best ones and only grow them on. But I've a bit short of space, so I can't be that particular. Then you get loving parsnips. Do you want me to keep going on with this stuff, or do you want to?
I think, let's talk tomatoes now, I suppose.
Yeah.
And for sure.
Okay. Heirlooms, there's a lot of debate about what an heirloom tomato is, but it's usually something that's probably about 50 years old. People talk about post-war tomatoes as anything pre-Second World War is probably an heirloom. Anything after is a bit more modern. It's usually handed down from grower to grower. All of the characteristics are usually pretty true from generation to generation, and that makes an heirloom tomato. The hybrids are often bred where they get, say, one parent with great disease resistance and another one with lovely, tough red skin that will be great for transporting. And let's cross those together and find tomatoes that are really disease resistant and then you can throw onto the back of a truck with a pitchfork, and that'll be fantastic to sell in a supermarket. But it doesn't have to be just dreadful tomatoes. You can make, you know, really superb hybrid tomatoes too. And there are people who are working on that, but commercial reasons mean that they're usually not the ones that people are aiming for. And if you want to do a hybrid, it gets a little bit complex, but what they tend to do is make that hybrid anew every single year. So someone goes out into the hothouse, has a row of the disease-resistant ones, a row of the lovely tough-skinned ones, and they literally go around crossing those two together and collecting the seed out of those fruit to sell to the commercial growers.
Yep, great.
There's lots of lovely diverse tomatoes around. We don't just have to eat big red ones, and they've all got superb flavors. Another way you can combine characteristics is grafted tomatoes. So you get something with a really tough rootstock that's really, really robust and disease resistant. You snip the stem off, you get your beautiful flavored tomato and attach those two stems together as seedlings, and you get all the benefits of the big tough root and all of the nice fruit growing on the top, and you can grow those out. Now, I must admit, I did buy one once. They're a lot more expensive because there's a lot of labor involved. I didn't notice a huge amount of difference in the quality of the tomatoes that I was producing. But then I didn't have a lot of disease pressure, and I had pretty good growing conditions. So I think they might have a use. A lot of heirlooms are sold off because they're heirlooms. You know, people talk about the Landis Valley strain of the Brandywine tomato. Well, if you live in Pennsylvania in the Landis Valley, that might be the perfect tomato to grow. But on the Hunter or in central Victoria, where we get frosts and hardly any water, they're generally rubbish. So heirloom doesn't mean it's going to be fantastic for you. And apart from that, every single season's different. Trying to grow the best tomato, I reckon, doesn't really work unless you've got really standard conditions year after year. And so I always grow a range. There's a tomato called Hillbilly that's a bicolor, so it's red and yellow. And some years for me, it's a spectacular tomato. Other years it's ordinary, like it's a poor producer and doesn't taste very good. But other years it can just be spectacular.
Is that a reflection that tomatoes are quite sensitive to the climate and the season that
They can be. They can be. I mean, if we go on to a few of the other tomatoes, we'll have a bit of a chat about that. I reckon the Dwarf tomato project has got some fantastic tomatoes if you've got limited space. Bunnings and other retailers sell Dwarf patio tomatoes. I haven't really tried them, but there's no reason why they shouldn't be really good. Early tomatoes are pretty good, but they tend to suffer a little bit. I mean, if you're in a really frosty area, which North Sydney isn't, you might want to grow early tomatoes, but the trade-off there is, you get tomatoes, but they're usually not the best tomato in the world. It's, one of those trade-offs.
Is that tomatoes that just fruit quite quickly? Is that right?
Yeah, they're actually bred to set fruit at colder temperatures. The fruit's usually smaller, so they don't have to put so much effort into trying to grow a tomato. They'll ripen up quicker. But they've got less time to develop all those sugars and complex flavors and stuff. So while they'll be a nice tomato, they're not going to be like the knock it out of the park tomato that is the best in the universe, in my experience. But any homegrown tomato is better than no tomato. Green shoulders is often associated with flavour, and that's been bred out by a whole lot of commercial growers. So let's go on. I'll show you a green tomato. So there's a tomato with green shoulders, Canadian crop.
What the tomatoes you're showing it, are some of these on your website or?
Yeah. You can get them other places as well, you know. I'm not just going to flog mine.
Yep.
Black tomatoes are really fantastic, but they tend to have a slightly shorter shelf life, more complex flavors, and they're really good. Everyone says Black Russian, but there's a whole pile of fantastic black tomatoes. My favorite is Yaponski Truffelchernyi, or Japanese Black Truffle, which came out of a commercial breeding program in Siberia. And it's a commercial variety from the Soviet Union. Black cherry is a real fantastic little cherry tomato. Arbushny is another beauty. Brad's Black Heart was bred by a guy in the States. So that's a heart-shaped tomato. The hearts are often a little bit susceptible to, they're a little bit delicate. They've got droopy foliage. They always look like they need water, even when they don't. They tend to suffer a bit from blossom end rot, but they look spectacular on a plate. So it's not a bad trade-off. Arbushny is another Russian commercial variety. And that's Sarah Black, which I think came out of the States. Cherry tomatoes are usually really good. I always grow lots of cherries. They're tough plants. They produce really well. They pump out tomatoes. And you just can't beat Tomito, I reckon, for a cherry tomato.
Tomito, okay.
Yeah. There's one other thing we really should talk about, which is bush or determinate tomatoes. You often hear of them as being non-staking tomatoes. And these have been developed for traditional harvest originally. So, you know, your tomatoes would come, they put on a big flush of fruit in one go. They're relatively like knee-high or just quite short. They put on a big flush of fruit. It all ripens at once. You get the whole family around. They harvest all the tomatoes. You cook your tomato passata in one weekend, and that's your tomatoes for the year. But yeah, so they're really good for storage. And the other characteristics they've often been bred for is low moisture, so that you don't have to cook them so much to make a really good concentrated paste, and low seed. And whilst most of them are still pretty good eating, they're not designed for table eating on the whole.
Right.
Whereas indeterminate tomatoes, our Grosslist, our Apollo Improved, Mortgage Lifter, they just keep growing, producing fruit, keep growing, producing fruit until they die in winter.
So that would be the majority of tomato.
Yeah.
Commercial.
And just for clarity, well, most of our tomatoes come out of greenhouses now, and they've been highly developed for greenhouse cultivation. And they actually grow them on huge, big, long stems. And they'll end up with like a 20-foot plant that they're picking trusses off in the hothouse. But that's another whole story. The other thing that we should talk about is, while bush tomatoes are small, they're determinate. They stop growing, produce all their fruit at once, and that's it. Dwarf tomatoes are small, but they keep growing through the year, and they keep developing fruit through the year. So the dwarf tomatoes are indeterminate, but small. How am I going for time? I don't want to eat it all up.
No, good. We've got about another 5 minutes.
Okay.
Doing good.
My favorites are Jean Flamme, which is a beautiful orange golf ball on trusses. I've got pictures coming up.
Yeah. And are we able, are anyone able to access these in Australia, or is it something that, are they available?
These are all available.
Okay.
Jean Flamme you can get through Diggers. I think Eden Seeds sell it. Green Harvest maybe sell it. Tomito is just really widespread.
Yeah.
It's such a good tomato. Why would you eat any other cherry tomato?
We're getting a few comments on the Tomatoes saying, they're their favorite.
Andrew?
So, yeah.
Yeah, I reckon Tomito's a ripper.
Yeah.
Tough, pumps out tomatoes, great flavor. Yeah, it's a real beauty. Japanese Black Truffle is, as I said, my favorite black Russian tomato. KBX came out of the United States. It's a cross of Kellogg's breakfast tomato, not from the Kellogg's cereal family, but from a fellow called Darren Kellogg, who made a bit of a joke about breakfast cereals when he named it. Grubb's Mystery Green, that came out of David Lockwood's veggie garden in Sydney in 2005. It's a green when ripe tomato. So it softens a little bit. It goes slightly yellow, and it's just spectacular tomato flavour. Like just really, really good. Big tomatoes. One slice makes a sandwich. Just looks spectacular.
That sounds amazing.
And they grow maybe 1.5, 1.6 meters high. Midnight Sun, which I grew for the first time last year, is a beautiful yellow heart. It's a modern heirloom, bred by Karen Olivia in Canada. And Greek Witness, that was collected by an internet friend of mine called Doug Oldacre. And he got it from a Jehovah's Witness who happened to be a Greek guy who came to his front door one day. And it's just a great red tomato.
Yeah, wow.
So that's Jean Flamme. The boards underneath are standard 65 mil decking boards. So that's just an idea of size. So Jean Flamme just pumps out these beautiful golf ball sized trusses of tomatoes. They're early, spectacular flavour. It's a bit zingy. It's not super sweet. I call this like a big cherry tomato for adults. It's for adult flavours, not little kids. That's Japanese black truffle. Great flavoured tomato. KBX, it just doesn't, like, it's not the heaviest producer in the universe, but beautiful tomatoes, really, really meaty, with just a tiny band of gel and seeds just around the outside of the fruit. And the rest is just this solid, spectacular, eye-popping yellow-orange. That's Grubb's Mystery Green.
Wow.
I did pinch, that's ripe. I did pinch that image from Tatiana Korichnevaya, from Tatiana's tomato base, with permission.
Just touching on the taste of the green one, is that sort of, what does it taste like?
Oh, really, really tomatoey. Just close your eyes and you're just in tomato heaven. Yeah,
that's a good way of putting it.
But the green colour does put some people off. They get a slight yellow blush to them, just a hint of yellow, but flavour's really, really good. Midnight Sun, which is a heart, and it's that beautiful two-coloured sort of pink blush over yellow. I'll be growing that again just to see how it comes in another year. And there's just some tomato fun. That was two weird tomatoes that came off a variety called Speckled Roman.
Yeah, wow.
And for some reason they developed these side growths with a few chilies and a few basil. But
yeah, great.
I better stop because I could go all night.
Oh, thanks, Greg. That was great seeing and learning more about heirloom and hybrid tomatoes. And I mean, honestly, it's I'd never heard of most of those, and I haven't never seen a green tomato that is edible like that. So it's a whole new world, really, isn't it?
Yeah. Oh, and on this picture, the little yellow eyes are a little cherry tomato called Snow White, and they're perfectly ripe. And a lot of the white tomatoes I find a bit bland. They're pale yellow. This one just really packs flavour. So Snow White would be another cherry that I grow every year. It's just an absolute ripper.
Yeah, good stuff. Thanks, Greg.
Yes.
All right. So I'll just remove that. So just handing over now to Meyles. Meyles is a former tomato commercial grower. now an avid backyard grower and runs a website and service called Hunter Backyard Veggies, which provides it's a subscription service you can find and sign up, and passes on information through the season. So I'll let Andrew talk to more about that, but also he's put a presentation on some growing tips for everyone for this season. So thanks, Miles.
Well, Miles, just before you start, can I say, feel free to contradict anything I've said, because there's more than one way to grow tomatoes.
Well, you can be rest assured I couldn't find anything I contradict, but I did make some notes, I must admit.
Okay, so, we'll catch up afterwards.
We did have a few requests about if we can send a list of all the tomatoes that were mentioned. And so, I will put that together and I'll send that out afterwards to everyone who's registered.
Yes, I'm going to go mute.
Okay, well, hi everybody, and it's great to be here presenting today from Newcastle. I'm up higher than everybody else, but our climate is somewhat similar. I'm right on the coast in Newcastle. If you just go to bed at night, you can hear the waves crashing on Stockton Beach, so that's how close to the coast I am. I don't, from a climate perspective, I've been here 13 years and I've had 2 frosts, and I had to go outside to touch them to see if they were real. So I don't consider this a cold area. For me, where I come from Hobart originally, a good Tassie born and bred. So that's my background there. I moved here 13 years to Newcastle. But I have grown tomatoes for decades. I used to be in business with my father, and we used to grow tomatoes commercially. We had probably about 8,000 plants growing in greenhouses in Tassie at one particular stage. So we've got a lot of experience there. They were all hybrids. They were grown in the ground. They were grown hydroponically. We grew grafted varieties. And we grew 2 crops a year. That was just the way things were done back then. We had no heating in these greenhouses, so we had to squeeze in 2 crops a year. But so I can tell you all about the pros and cons of growing commercially and what you've got to throw on them to keep them alive and to make an income. And I shudder at the chemicals that I had to use at that particular time, which I don't use now. So I've seen both ends of the spectrum. So today I'm just going to share my screen, and I have a presentation. Now let's make sure I get this right. And what do you see there, Jordan? Is that it?
Oh yeah, if you click on from beginning, start the slideshow. Yep. No, sorry, it's I think you're on the note view. If you can get it on the full slide.
Okay.
Can you click on that from beginning?
From beginning.
There we go.
It's not really doing it for me. I've got it on one screen.
That's okay. That's fine. That's fine, Miles. We can see the slides, so I'm not sure on the fix on that. So
okay, I'll just see if I can change screens. Okay, well, look, I'm quite okay with going this from here if everybody's like. They probably can't see the small bit, but I'll just try one more. How's that?
Yeah, that's better.
Cool, great. I just had to click a button. Okay, so I'm going to talk about growing tomatoes, and this is how I have done it for many, many years here in Newcastle. Like I mentioned, I come from Tassie, so I had to relearn growing tomatoes here. The basics were the same, but I now grow them all outside rather than inside. So I started Hunter Backyard Veggie Growers probably about 10 years ago because as a keen backyarder, everybody started to ask me how I grew things in my backyard. So after a while, I got onto Facebook and started to share pictures. I created a page. Before you know, thousands of people following that and asking you questions. So that grew into a website, and I do some public speaking things, and then before you know it, I'm doing consulting, and before you know it, I have a subscription site. So please feel free to go to hunterbackyardveggiegrowers.com. You'll see information on there. There's not everything is available to everybody. There's a subscription option, and everybody gets information which is basically growing and planting schedules on, and they follow along what I do here. And I respond to questions and answers, and I've got videos and tips and all sorts of stuff like that. But what I'm doing today, I run a tomato growing workshop, but because of COVID, I haven't been able to do them, unfortunately. So this is a condensed version on a presentation. So what I'll cover today is things on how I start the tomatoes, soil preparation, site selection, planting them, growing them, plant health, pests, and then there's going to be time for questions. And I'd very much like to hear from you, those questions, because that's where you're at. All of the pictures you'll see in this presentation were taken in my garden this season. So it's really in the last 4 to 5 weeks they were taken. So some of these are literally taken today. So they're quite fresh, and it'll give you an idea of what stages we're at. What you see on the screen there now is a honeybee. So it's a cherry, and it will take another week or so, and I might even get the first one. So that's the stage I am at here in my garden. So the first thing is how I start my tomatoes. So I sow my tomatoes in mid-July. Now they are sown in a inverted plastic tub, 100 litre plastic tub, and I have a heat mat in there, and I keep that heat mat on about 20 degrees, and they emerge within 10 days to a fortnight. And the seedlings you see on the picture there, they're about 3.5, 4 weeks old, ready to be transplanted into pots. So I start that in mid-July. It's pretty early, but I also grow some seedlings for my workshops and open days, so I have to start them early. But it's really good because I aim to plant them into my garden beds mid-September, and I have nice sized plants if I start them at that stage. Like I mentioned, the temperature is 20 degrees is what I keep it for emergence. And what I make sure that I do is just to keep them moist, not wet. And once they've emerged at this size here, I start the regime of feeding them. And all I use is regular off-the-shelf fertilizers or growth stimulants, but I do that at about 25% of what they recommend on the pack. I don't want to overdo it at this stage. So that's what I do for feeding. Now the soil, as you can see there, it's quite a basic thing. I use just normal seedlings. I add to it. So it's 3 parts seedlings mix, 2 parts peat moss, 1 part perlite, 1 part vermiculite. And if I think the seedling mix is of not brilliant quality, I might even add a little bit of blood and bone to give them a boost. And that's what I start my seedlings in, and they take off beautifully because the aim is to start them growing lushly and to keep them going from there on. Moving on to the next slide, it'll take a second to come to you, but this is a soil preparation of site selection. I'll first back up and say I grow intermediate tomatoes. I don't do any bush ones. I aim for all intermediate one. I think I can get more tomatoes per square metre in my backyard. This is a picture of my yard this year, and the bed with the bag of mulch is where I have planted my tomatoes. So I select a location that is in full sun if possible, but if it's going to get shade, I want to maintain 6 to 8 hours of sun minimum per day. That will get me a good tomato plant. The other key thing that I make sure that I do is that I haven't grown tomatoes in that garden bed for 2 to 3 years. And not just tomatoes, but anything else of the same family, which includes potatoes, chilies, eggplants. What else have I got in there? If you've got a nightshade problem and you've got lots of them growing, that is all the same family because they are carriers of those diseases. And I like to have good crop rotations, and we'll touch on diseases a bit later and you'll understand why. So my soil, I prepare my soil by checking it, and if I need to, I adjust the soil pH to 6.5. I haven't had to do that for a while, but what I do in every year, I add compost, preferably from my own compost bin. Or if I haven't got any available, I'll use mushroom compost. I'll use cow manure, I'll use rock minerals, Epsom salts and potash. And that's the foundation for my tomato bed. And then I wait for 2 weeks and I retest pH before I plant. Now, the other thing I'd just point out on this one, the bed that you see the bag on is a wicking bed, and we'll get to the watering on that later. But that's, I like growing tomatoes on wicking beds. We'll see why later. So here is a seedling I grew this year. This is what the local neighbourhood, because I couldn't have open days here in where I live, I advertised on the local Facebook page, and there's a lot of tomatoes all of a sudden where I live. And I hope they go well because my reputation's at stake. But what you do, whenever you grow a tomato or purchase a tomato, first thing is to make sure you choose a healthy plant. And healthy plant means that it's got a good colour, it hasn't got broken bits on it, or disease marks on it, but make sure you choose a healthy plant because you want to plant that and get it to take off straight away. So this plant here, when I plant a tomato, I will dig a hole which is almost 3 times the depth of whatever pot I get it in. And then in the bottom of that pot, if I will put another teaspoon of Epsom salts and then put on about 2 to 3 centimetres of soil. And then I'll trim off the bottom. I'm not sure if you can see this, particularly on small devices. I'll trim off these bottom few leaves and I will plant it to a depth of at least 1/3 to half of that stem. So all of a sudden that tall plant becomes reasonably short. And the reason I do that is because I want additional roots to grow from that stem so that the plant gets more roots, particularly for take up of nutrition and water during our warm months. And that's the way you do it. You plant it deep so that you get more roots. If you've got a really tall plant, you can actually lay it sideways and then just put a stake for the tip to keep it above ground. And that maximizes the amount of roots that you will grow on that stem. I then will support it a number of different ways. I usually grow it through a mesh, which you'll see in the next slide, but I have actually grown them up stakes, but because I'm in a wicking bed, I don't want to go hammering stakes into the garden bed because it kind of will puncture the wicking bed. I also have built a frame and grown them up streams before. Each one of those things works very well, but my preference at the moment is for mesh. Because it works well on my wicking beds. I will put mulch down on the garden bed, and it's usually about 3 centimetres thick. And the reason for that is firstly for weed control. That's one thing. The other one is to maintain soil temperature. But a key thing is that when you put mulch down, never put it right up against the stem. You leave a bare ring around it. That's to help keep your stem dry. When I plant them, I first give them a very good deep soaking, and then I don't water them for a week and then let them go off. But at the same time, part of that watering system is the first feeding I do. And ideally I use something like wormweed out of my worm bin, diluted, or I'll use a tomato nutrient booster. But again, it's a weak brew, but it just gives them a bit of boost to help them with transplant shock. I'll just move to the next slide. So that's my crop this year. You can see the support that I have got them growing through. And you also see some marigolds planted amongst it. and the mulch that I use. So that gives you a bit of an idea on at what stage they are now. Now, I can tell you that was taken a week ago, and they've added a good 30 centimetres since then. They are going gangbusters right now. So the question people quite often ask me is, do you prune or not prune? The way that I grow them is I prune. I take out every lateral along the way as they grow. I want my plants to grow, each plant to have 2 stems. So I grow them in a fork, and then I train those stems up through that mesh along the way. So each one of those plants, there's 9 in that garden bed. So I'll have 18 growing stems along the way. And but I take every lateral shoot out as I go. Now, I've noticed here in the Hunter, where I grow, that quite often, as soon as it gets too hot, the plant collapses very quickly. So I grow my tomatoes to a height where I can count up each of those stems 5 tomato trusses, and then I pinch the top out. So I'll only grow 5 trusses up each stem, so that's 10 per plant. And then the crop is done and dusted, because I have noticed here where I live that it gets so warm and humid in summer, the fighting against the disease is a losing battle, so I don't fight it. I just go with it. But I am also preparing or trialing some cherries to grow through the hotter months. So, Greg, I'll be very interested if you have varieties of heat-resistant tomatoes that set fruit. The other reason I don't grow through the hotter months is not much fruit sets. It's just too warm here for me. And speaking of that, pollination. They're wind pollinated plants, so you don't have to do too much with them. But if you are having pollination issues, or you are growing in protecting them from insects through mesh or something like that, wind will pollinate them pretty well. But if you want to enhance your pollination, I just go through and go to a truss and literally flick it 2 or 3 times with your fingers, and that helps set it, because it's the vibration that sets the fruit. So moving across to plant health. For me, watering is a key thing here. Once you have your plant established, because I'm growing in wicking beds, I just make sure that there is sufficient moisture in the wicking bed, and that draws up through the soil and the plant takes the moisture it needs. The other thing with a wicking bed is that the roots go deep seeking that soil, so it really helps through the summer growth. But if you're growing in a normal garden bed or in a large pot, you have to keep that soil moist and deeply moist. So during the cooler periods, you probably water a couple of times a week and water deep. But during the heat of summer, I run irrigation every day through drippers around my tomatoes to keep them hydrated. You can see from this plant here, that's one plant, and I have got a fork. That's the 2 stems that I do. So when you grow the plants, I leave, when they're about 20 centimetres, the strongest lateral is what I go for the second shoot. Feeding them. I feed my tomato plants regularly throughout the growing season. They are hungry feeders. You've got to keep nutrition up to them. Most of your nutrition is added during the soil preparation phase and is held there by the organic matter in your soil. Hence, that's why it's so much compost, because you want the nutrition in there to remain, and it carries the plant through. But I do liquid feed every 3 weeks, different types of liquid foliar feed. I sometimes put it on the foliar or just straight on the ground. And if I think there is a need for it, I will actually put a bit of pelletized chicken manure around them, just underneath the mulch, and water that on top if they need a bit of a boost as well. And that is basically the feeding I do throughout the crop. I also remove leaves from the base of the plant. And you can see here that I've taken away a lot of leaves. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 removed, or 6 removed from there. There's 2 reasons for that. One is I want to keep the leaves off the ground. because I want to keep them dry. And they're the leaves that will be the likely ones that will get diseases because they stay moist. You also find that as the plant grows, the bottom leaves will yellow. They lose their effectiveness, so you might as well take them away. But one of the key reasons is to improve airflow under the plants so you can keep the foliage dry to help prevent diseases. And I have been known to take up to 1/3 of the stem length of leaves away as the crop grows. So by the end of the growth, at least 1/3 is removed. A, they're useless, and B, I want to expose the fruit for ripening. So that's what I do along the way. The next thing I just wanted to quickly touch base on, I'm just watching the time here, is companion planting. I plant marigolds in amongst my tomatoes. I do that to help the prevention of nematodes in the soil. Other ones I would suggest is garlic, if you can do it, or basil. They all help with helping to keep the aphid and other insects away. But also it helps control some of the diseases because you attract beneficial insects in there that will help become predators for tomatoes. So the next slide will give you a bit of an idea. Here's the marigolds right up the middle. There's 3 plants there. And I actually start to prune them to keep the airflow for the tomatoes, but they will just flower all the way through. And I have got basil in the next door bed, so that's why I haven't planted them here this year. Now, diseases, you can see on the photograph on the left, there's a few spots. That's the first sign of disease for this season that I have. What I will do with that is those leaves will be removed in a bag and in the bin. I don't put them in my compost because I don't want to spread the disease. But the biggest issue for tomatoes, I find, is fusarium wilt or blight has been popped up, but it's all types of foliar diseases. And the best cure is actually prevention. And the best prevention is to avoid watering over the top. You can't stop the rain, of course, you need that. But to keep them as dry as you can, foliage-wise, and keep the airflow in. And if you do need to spray, you may want to use, I use neem oils for that, just to keep it at bay. But they're the main diseases. I don't get too many diseases here. You might see things like blossom end rot occasionally. That means to me that I was being pretty lazy with calcium in the soil. A quick fix for that is I've used before a mixture of 50-50 milk and water just to give it a quick boost. Not super effective, but it did help. But you need to add the calcium in. I do that with rock minerals at the start of a crop, and I've been okay. And I also throw my eggshells in the compost, so that all helps as well. But diseases are common in tomatoes, and there are lots of them. But prevention is the key. So things to look out for is the wilts, where your leaves start to yellow, because sometimes if you let that go, it will disappear your tomato crop will disappear very quickly. So to prevent that is to try and select varieties that are resistant. And if you find a variety that works in your backyard that doesn't get it, keep growing that one, because that's what I keep trialing new varieties for, particularly for the wilt. The other key thing is, and this is why you rotate your crops and don't plant tomatoes year after year in the same spot, because a lot of these diseases move into the soil, and that's how each year it keeps cropping up. You need to break the cycle of that fungal disease by rotating crops. So that's good garden hygiene is the key there. So I'll move to the next one, and that is pests. Okay, common pests. And I just realised I advertised somebody on this page, but anyway, that's okay. Common pests are fruit fly. We get them all the way up the east coast here. In fact, they're spreading right around Australia now, and I've got them here. I learned about them very quickly when I came up from Tassie, who haven't got them, that they make a mess of your fruit. And the best way to prevent them, I find, is to protect your fruit in bags like this one I have here. In previous years, I have grown my entire crop within an insect-proofed cage. That works really well, but it's a bit cumbersome. So this year I'm going to grow all my beef tomatoes, my large ones, in bags like this, just to give them the protection. It also protects them from caterpillars, I find. And it keeps the white fly off them as well, if you get that. It doesn't solve the problem, but they are a great prevention for that. But the big hint here, what I can leave you with, is to make sure before you put the bag on that there are no bugs on the fruit. Because what you're basically doing is you're creating a microclimate. If you've got a caterpillar, it'll be there, it'll be enjoying itself, and no bird will come and eat it because they can't get it. So I will give my crop, particularly the fruit, a bit of a dose in a week dose of neem oil before I put the bag on, just to catch the last ones that I can't see. Nematodes is a major issue for sandy soils like mine, and also in the warm climate. So again, soil hygiene is the key here. They are a little microscopic animal that lives in your soil that will attack the root system. You won't even know they're there until you see the plant start to look real tired because it's losing its vigor. And what that means is that the nematodes are attacking the roots and consuming the micro hairs that are on the roots, so it can't absorb water and nutrients. So the plant will be lacking in nutrition, unable to absorb moisture, and it will have no vigor. And that's a sign of nematodes. And what I do every year at the end of the crop, I pull the plant up, inspect the roots, and if I see that there's nematodes there, that soil will get a green crop of mustard or marigolds that I dig into the soil to help reduce those numbers, and then I rotate that crop. But it's a constant battle every year. The white fly is another thing that is around with warm weather. I give that a light dose. You can do make a garlic and chili spray, again, weak dose, and you shake the plant in there in the air, and then you give them a spray so you get the actual insect itself. But they come in plague proportions, and the aim to control them is actually to bring in natural predators. So the environment I have here, I have lots of environments for small birds to come and visit. And I've created that, and they keep most of my insects at bay. I very rarely have to spray to control insects because I have lots and lots of birds that keep the caterpillars away. They don't get fruit fly, unfortunately. That's why I need bags. But having a good environment will help protect your tomatoes. So that's a real rush summary of how I grow tomatoes. This year, I've got 16 varieties. I posted the list of the varieties in the chat if you wanted to have a look at that. I grow up in mesh. They'll grow to about 5 clusters or so. And this year is the first year for many years that I actually have grafted a few of them onto a rootstock. I grew the rootstock and grafted it. It's been decades since I've done that, since I did it commercially. And I'm interested to see if I get a good resistance to nematodes and how they are resistant to fusarium wilt and some of those common problems that can crop up in my garden. So it's a real test this year. If it works well, I'll be grafting more next year. So that's, to me, comes to the end of the presentation, and the whole aim of growing tomatoes is to get baskets full like that. That's last year's crop, just a few of them. So that's my growing tomatoes. So if you would like to know more, please get onto my website. Feel free to do that. A lot of the information that I shared is on a couple of blogs. What I'll do after this presentation, there's a few blogs on there on growing tomatoes. I will make them available online to everybody, so you can feel free to get on them, but normally they're just subscriber content, but I'll get them on there to show you some of my tomato stuff. So, and I'll leave that open for a week or so for people to have a look at. But please feel free to get on there and have a look. So thank you. Open to questions.
Hi, Miles. I also use steel weld mesh as the support for my tomatoes. So I get the 1.8 meter by 1 meter wide, 100 mil by 100 mil squares of steel mesh, big enough to get your hand through so you can pick a tomato on the other side. They last for years and years and years. They're easy to stack. And then you can use them for cucumbers and peas and beans and all sorts of stuff. So yeah, fantastic.
Yeah, my garden is full of them. I've got melons growing up them, cucumbers, beans, and some of mine are 10 years old, and you can't tell the difference between the ones I bought 10 years ago and now. I've got all galvanized ones, so you've got them for years if you look after them.
Yeah. What I've done with some of mine is my beds are a meter apart, and I've put one pointing up on one side on one bed and on the other bed, and then got a third one and curved it over in an arch over the top and wired it together. And if you grow climbing beans up it, all the climbing beans hang down below the mesh. So you just wander around and pick all the beans off. So yeah, that's a great idea.
Nice.
And I had some nasty disease at my last house, and I did all of those things that you said. Only drip irrigate, no overhead watering, prune all the leaves up off the ground so there's no water splash of spores up onto the leaves. Really heavy mulch to, again, stop any of that splash of soil onto the leaves. And it got so bad, I even got to the stage of getting a flame weeder, pulling up my dripper tape and flame weeding the whole top of the bed before I planted the tomatoes in it, just to kill off any spores. Lucky I moved to a new property, so it's not quite so bad.
Yeah, I look, and I acknowledge that where I grow them here, that when it gets to about January, the humidity in the atmosphere here, and I reckon this will happen in Sydney as well, some varieties are just not viable. Yeah. So I aim to get the bulk of my crop prior to Christmas, and that's where I get most of it. And anything that I do regarding preserving or tomato sauce comes from the pre-Christmas crop. And then I remove it and grow another crop completely different to break the cycle because of those disease issues.
So that was a question from Nanette. So when's the best time to sow seed? So Mo, you mentioned that you start in July, but you can start now and then up until like the start of the early new year, or?
Yeah, I will continue to sow. I'm going to be sowing some in January because I think I'm going to try a couple of tomato where I overwinter them. So if I sow them in January, get them started in February sometime, they'll get a good growth on before it cools down. So you can sow them for quite a long period of time. If you wanted to sow them without heat mats, I think you wouldn't be doing it till beginning of September. Yeah, because you need the soil warmth to get them going.
Yeah, right. Question from Oksana: are there any shade tolerant varieties for maybe people on balconies or in apartments, things like that? Do you need 6 hours sun for all tomatoes?
Yeah, my response to that would be is tomatoes do need sun, but and I would aim for 6 hours. But what I actually do during the hot months of summer, I actually grow them under shade cloth because it is too hot throughout summer. So I aim to reduce the sun. But I don't know particularly of varieties that are shade tolerant. I would have to research that one.
Yep.
How about you, Greg?
Sorry, Greg, you're on mute.
I think if you went with some of the early varieties that need less heat to actually set fruit and develop, that might be a way to go.
What are a couple of those?
Sillets, and I don't tend to grow them, so you've got my mind going there. But
it's all right. I mean, yeah, I'll put you on the spot there, but we can. I'll add them on the ever-growing list when I send it out to everyone, if we can.
Yeah, Kimberley is another one. Sillets is one, and there's a third one that I have grown and I can't remember.
Yeah.
That another thing that you might try if you've got a little bit of indirect sun is white boards to actually reflect light onto your plants to increase the amount of solar radiation a little bit. So you could use foil board or something like that. You need to be careful that it wasn't too hot and you didn't cook your plants, but that might give you just that little bit of extra nudge to enable you to get an edible crop off. I certainly use that when I'm raising seedlings inside, and the low light down here in icicle-like Victoria isn't sufficient, and all of the plants grow really long and spindly and lean towards the window when I'm growing them inside. So I get a cardboard beer carton and line it with tin foil and face that towards the window, and enough light comes off the window bouncing around the back of the seedlings so that they don't all lean forward and get all leggy and droopy. So you might be able to use that sort of technique in a low light growing situation.
Yeah, great. Kalita, I think you had a question. Jump in if you want.
Oh yes, I'm not going to write it. It's too long. I just feel like we've got a lot of brain power here between Tony and Andrew and Greg. And I just wanted to ask, it's great that you guys are mentioning the diggers and green harvest, but here in Sydney, I've only got like a very small garden. I've only been able to ask my landlady to utilize like 1 meter by 2 meters, so it's really small. And so buying the seeds from those places that you're telling us, normally they give you about 2 years for them. There's a lot of seeds in them, but I'm finding that I'm just going to Bunnings and buying just like one-off tomato plant or whatever. But I'm finding that when you get to the end of the cycle and you save seeds, that those seeds from those plants from Bunnings really don't regerminate the following year. So my question is, if you buy from diggers and green harvest, are the seeds, are they able to germinate outside of the 2-year gap that they give you for planting? I'm sorry, I don't know how to explain my question. It's a very long-winded one, but it's around, I'd love to support all those companies, but they give you so many seeds for such a small space that we have in the city that I'm sort of like not sure what to do around seed saving, where to buy my seeds, but I've only got a small space, and I'm sorry I've wasted so much time just asking the question.
Good question. No, thanks.
I'd be quite happy to answer that one. Look, I buy seed every year, and I save seed as well. But if I buy a packet of seed from a seed supplier and it's got about 20 odd seeds in, I really only want a couple of plants. I keep that seed packet probably for about 3 years. So I'll sow a quarter the first year to get my seedlings, a quarter the second year, and probably a half the third year, because I haven't got perfect seed storing facilities and it loses some of its strength over time. So I will give that small packet about 3 years. If I grow my own seed, and if there's varieties that I trust are going to come back to shape, I'll probably keep them for about 4 years. But if I know it's going to easily produce new seed, it doesn't really matter so much. So yeah, the seeds will remain viable for a number of years. In fact, even longer than that. They're very, very resilient seeds, but they lose their viability over time. But 3 years is a rule of thumb that I use.
Okay, thank you.
A good way to think about it is the seed is actually a living thing. And, you know, it's not some inert thing, and it's got a lifetime. And so you need to take that into consideration. That said, I get my seed, dry it down quite well, which I can do down here because it's pretty dry in summer. Dry it on a paper towel, fold it up, make sure it's really good and dry, pop it in a little Ziploc plastic bag, and I store all my seed in the fridge. And that I'm growing seed now from 2009. That said, it's my own seed, and so I know that I've put it away really fresh and I've stored it really well. But tomato seeds are usually pretty good. Like if you get a really nice tomato in a restaurant, get the serviette, if it's a paper one, squeeze a bit of the seed onto it, fold it up, dry it out, resow it the next year, just put the paper towel down and a bit of soil on top, and you should get fruit up.
Some of the mainstream commercial seeds, are they genetically sort of bred so that they can't be reseeded?
You'll find that, and Greg will know more about this than I do, you'll find if you get the seeds off your supermarket shelf, you don't actually know what variety they are. You don't know its breeding, whether it's genetically bred and crossed between plant A and plant B, and the progeny of that, any young, you don't know if you're going to get what you're actually going to get. There's no guarantee that you'll get a good variety. You might get a variety that's all leaves, no fruit, or you might get all these things. So I just avoid that completely because it's like a lottery.
Yeah,
that's what my take on that. And Greg,
just to expand a little bit, the commercial growers who are really, really interested in productivity and disease resistance and stuff, it's worth their while to buy a F1 hybrid. That is where two parents have been selected and you're drawing characteristic from each of those parents to put it into the seed that you're about to sow. And without going heavily into the genetics of it, they will all those genes will redistribute again in the second generation, which makes hybrids a real lottery, as Mars has said. But for most growers, in most of the plants you grow, not very many of them, where you're buying a packet of seed or a plant from Bunnings, not many of those are going to be F1 hybrids, because they actually have to manually hand pollinate each flower to get the seed for that F1 plant. There's no easy way to do it, and they're really expensive. And the only place that I know that sells F1 seed for backyard growers is a place called Lamley Nursery out the back of Ballarat in Victoria. I've got a friend who swears by them as really, really productive plants, but there's so much choice out there in Heirloom and Heritage and new open pollinated varieties that I just can't be bothered. There's new tomatoes for me to grow for the rest of my life.
Yep. Question about pruning to both of you. Emma asks, how do you know how much to prune? I think, Miles, you did sort of touch on it, but she says her plant's just under 1 meter tall and she's unsure where to prune. She's cut the bottom leaves off, but how much does she prune?
Yeah, Emma, I read that question and I thought, yep, good question. Like I mentioned about removing 1/3 of the foliage from the bottom up. So that's what I do from the foliage. But if you're talking about the laterals, the side shoots, I usually wait. They come up between the leaves. I usually wait till they're about 3 centimeters, maybe a bit bigger, and I just snap them off, each one, as we go. But if you're talking about the leaves, it's about 1/3 all the time. That's what I aim for.
How do you grow them up through the lattice? I'm still not quite sure how that works.
There's a combination. Look, I walk past it every couple of days, and if I see that there's a stem that's starting to move away, I do this when it's a little bit warm, actually, because they're a bit soft. I just push it back through. But if it's too long because I've been slack or I've been at work all day, I will then get back and I use a bit of hemp rope and I tie it on. But I make sure if I ever tie anything on, that I tie it on loosely, because got to give room for the stem to continue to expand. You don't want to cut it off. So I'll do a combination of weaving it through, and occasionally I'll tie it
Is this the main stem of the plant?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, but it's usually the top 20 to 30 centimeters is what I'm maneuvering only.
Okay. I've actually got a question about, I know, Miles, that you talked about the bags to protect from pests, and also irrigation. But if you don't have those two things, what are the next best sort of options.
Okay.
Do the fruit fly traps work?
Yeah, look, I'll go with the fruit fly first. You can buy sprays that help. The fruit fly traps, people have got all these great ideas on YouTube where they use all different brews and stuff, and they all work to a certain extent. They're not foolproof. None of this stuff is, I find. I think the most foolproof thing is a bag or grown in an insect-proof protection environment. But the fruit fly lures, that I'm not sure if people have seen them, you can buy lures that are a pheromone, which all the males think it's a female, and they literally walk into a lure, which gives them a dose of poison, so you kill off all the males in the neighborhood. But my only comment relating to that is you don't need one, you need a number of them, because fruit flies the prevailing wind may be coming from the east. So the fruit flies are being blown in from the east. So you want to catch them before they hit your tomatoes, not after. But then the next day it's coming from the south. So you need a number of each direction of the compass to capture fruit flies from each direction. But fruit flies will also attack your citrus. They'll attack your chilies. They'll attack lots and lots of other fruits. So lures are a really good thing. You can't bag everything. So it's a combination of all of the above. When you talk about irrigation, drip irrigation, look, I've set it up so that I use bore water using a automated watering system, so I don't have to worry about it so much, just to make sure it's operating correctly. But if you're going to water, you water a couple of times a week with a hose deeply on the soil, not the plant, the soil, because you want to keep the plant dry. Or the other option is to use wicking beds or wicking pots. I've got them both because then I have a reservoir of water underneath, because then you can go away for a week and your plants survive quite comfortably during the hot months, and they help the roots go deep into the soil.
Yep.
So there's a few options there, but if you're growing them in pots, you've got to keep your soil moist, otherwise your plants will get set back as well.
Yeah, great. Oksana, this is a bit of an unusual one. She's been raising her seedlings in the oven with the light on. And she's basically, this is a question about when can you start, when do you know the seedlings are ready to be planted type thing?
Okay. First one I've heard in the oven, I read that and I thought, oh God, I'd like to see a picture of how
Assuming
that works.
the oven's not on.
Yeah. It's a bit of a shame if you have to cook yourself some dinner. But look, if you've got a light that they can grow by, look, I would remove them from an environment when they start to develop their first true leaf. So with the tomato, you saw that picture I had up there of the young seedlings with two leaves. They're the young leaves. In that, you'll get another leaf start to develop. I would take them out of that environment and I'd put them in natural sunlight if you can at that point. That's when I would do it. Otherwise, you've got a risk of them getting a bit too spindly.
Yeah, great.
Andrew, just a quick question. When you do your 2 generations of tomatoes, do you ever think about taking cuttings off the first generation to grow on for your second generation, or is there too much chance of the first generation's disease being carried over on that foliage? Because tomatoes are so easy to grow from cutting, I thought it might be a way to jumpstart the next generation.
Look, it is a way of doing it, and I think if you have a healthy plant and your crop that year is healthy looking, I would say feel free to do that. But I avoid it because from experience, and particularly when I was a commercial grower, and also from experiences, you are running a high risk of transferring the current diseases into your next crop.
Yeah, I'm only a 1 generation boy down here. It's just too cold.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
Well, the other reason is there's a new variety of tomato to try, right?
True.
I think someone, was it Nick or Neil? Oh, Neil. Jump in, Neil, if you got a question.
Yeah, I'm growing on my balconies, maybe too many plants in a polystyrene container. Can I share my screen to show you what it looks like?
Yes. Yeah, there you go.
Okay, so I've never done this before, but let's see.
Me too, Neil.
Should see share screen button at the bottom there, the green one.
Yeah. All right. Oh, there you are. So can you see what I'm doing?
Yep.
Yep.
So anyone, so I'm growing about, I think it's 9 plants in that container in potting mix, and I'm just wondering, is it likely to succeed if I know keep giving it enough nutrient?
Yeah, look, they're looking good. They've got good looking colour at the moment. You will have to keep your nutrition up to those a lot, because as they grow, they'll have huge demands on that soil. So you'll need to keep your moisture and your nutrition up to them. My recommendation, if they're all the same variety and you don't want to lose any, I would just make it 4 plants, because I think they're a bit too thick, to be honest with you. So I would grow, if they're different varieties and it's a mixture and you want to try them, what will occur is there'll be a dominant variety or two that will probably take over time. But yeah, you're just going to have to make sure you feed them regularly. I would feed them every week as they grow, because there's a lot of plant that has to develop on that little bit of soil. I would also consider, when you remove some of the leaves from the bottom, topping the soil up so that you get an opportunity for another layer of roots to develop from the stem. Yeah. Because you need as much roots as you can to absorb the moisture that's in the soil, because that'll be a key to it. So keep them moist. I hope you've got plenty of holes in the bottom of that to keep, so the excess moisture drains. I'm sure you have, because they're looking quite healthy. But yeah, keep them moist and keep them well fed.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Neil. I think just one more question from Khalida. She's asking you, Greg, can I ask how small a melon are you hoping to achieve in the future? when small enough?
It was just a joke, because all his vegetables are so tiny. This tiny carrot, it's almost like he wants tiny people for them.
Can they fit in a lunchbox yet? Have you got to that size?
Depends how much lunch you eat.
Oh, you're on mute. Sorry, Greg.
Yeah, they're just about as small as I want. In fact, a couple last season were a bit too small. The issue for me is that the smaller the actual fruit or the bit that you want to eat, the less time usually you need to put in to get that to develop. So you could turn over one of the big limit, I sort of came to this because Bendigo, I moved to Bendigo at the start of the millennium drought, and it was just like horrendous trying to grow through the middle of summer. Like, it was just dusty, really dry. You couldn't keep the water up, stinking hot days. And so my idea was, if I could exploit spring and early summer, forget about January, February, March, and then grow more stuff in April, May at the end of the season, I'd need stuff that could mature relatively quickly, but I could hide from that really intense, dreadful middle of summer business. And that was part of the reason for trying to aim for small, quick turnover crops. And they're fun, they're cute. You know?
Yeah, I was laughing too. They are really cute. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's a winning idea there for kids to have that in a lunchbox. That's gold. That's
And the flavour's just unbelievably spectacular.
Wow.
A homegrown melon, the difference between a homegrown melon and a supermarket melon is the difference between a homegrown tomato and a supermarket tomato. Like, they're just spectacularly different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. Thanks, Greg. Thank you, Miles. And thank you, everyone, for all the questions and comments. I will make sure that I send out a list of a lot of the tomatoes that were mentioned in the presentation in the chat, and also links to useful seeds, Greg's business, and also Miles's business as well. So sign up and get some seeds from Useful Seeds if you want, and happy gardening, everyone, and feel free to send some photos of tomatoes as you grow for your season. And thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Yes, thanks, Jordan.
Okay, thanks,
Thank you,
everyone.
Jordan. Thank you, everybody. I enjoyed myself. So nice to meet you all.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.
I've had a wonderful evening talking tomatoes.
Yeah.
What?
Greg.
It's over already.
Thanks, Greg. Thanks, Miles. Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.
Bye.